right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the workshop. Every place has a climate story. I can't see all of you on the screen, but I can see the numbers. So I'm just so glad that you are all here. I'm Marcy Rockman. I am the lead for today's workshop on climate stories. I am based in Washington, D.C. I'm an archaeologist by training, and for the past 12 years or so, I've been working in several roles at the intersection of climate change, culture and heritage, and policy. Currently, I work with a nonprofit to support the US Congress with climate research, and I have the honor of serving as scientific coordinator for Climate.Culture.Peace. Also presenting this workshop with me today are two colleagues from ICROM, Chui and Xiao. Would you both quickly just introduce yourselves?
Sure, quite a short introduction. Hello, everyone. A pleasure to be here and very excited to facilitate this workshop with Dr. Marcy Rockman and João Pedro Toni. I'm Jui Ambani. I am originally from Mumbai, India. I'm an architect by background, and I'm currently working with the FAR program ICROM and one of the organizing members of Climate.Culture.Peace.
Hello, everyone. My name is João Pedro Toni. I'm an architect and urban planner based in Brazil, and I work in the FAR ICROM since last July. So it's an honor for me to be here with Dr. Marcy Rockman and trying to help a little bit in this incredible workshop.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. And to everyone who's participating in this workshop, would you please put into the chat your name and where you are from? Great, and I'm going to just share some slides for a moment. So with that, and while you're putting things into the chat, I'm going to start our session today with a short and simple story. So as I've just introduced, I am an archaeologist by training, and my research specialty is how humans learn unfamiliar environments, such as during colonization or migration. And I've studied this around the US, with the British Paleolithic, and for several other times and places around the world. From 2011 through 2018, I served with the US National Park Service as their climate change adaptation coordinator for cultural resources. In this role, it was my responsibility to figure out what climate change would mean for all of the cultural heritage that the Park Service oversees and that it manages, including archaeological sites, historic buildings and structures, cultural landscapes, museum collections and archives, and everything that is brought together under Indigenous and traditional knowledge and practices. And then I had to figure out what to do about it all. Early in that time, I learned that many of our park rangers were really struggling to talk about climate change. The rangers are the park staff in hats and uniforms that you will meet if you go to any US national park. They're the ones who will welcome you and tell you about the park. And what I heard they were saying is, I'm not a climate scientist. So many of the parks are not like the one that I am showing you on the screen. Most of them don't have melting glaciers or polar bears, and many are not on the coast with rising sea levels. So the park rangers were worried. They said, how do I talk about climate change here? They were very concerned. But I had a different perspective. From all of my work in archaeology, I could see that every place that is now a national park at some point in time was a home to people. And so if we could connect climate change and people, we could talk about climate change anywhere. And so we did. I set up a series of 4 themes, and using a simple narrative framework, we set up a project called Every Place Has a Climate Story to help park rangers find and write ways to talk about climate change in the park they were in. In the 7 years since we launched this project, climate stories have been developed for more than 20 parks, and recently in about as many places across the UK. And so far, there hasn't been a single place where it hasn't worked. So that approach is the basis of our workshop today. Now, the plan for our workshop today is I'm going to give you a brief overview of climate change itself, just so we're all starting from the same page. Then I'm going to introduce those 4 climate story themes. Then I'm going to introduce the and, but, therefore narrative framework. And then I'm going to give you some climate story examples so you can see how all of these parts come together. Then we're going to do a short group exercise. I'm going to ask you to pull on your own expertise and work and come up with ideas that might fit each of those 4 themes. What would you most like to talk about? Then, and I think this is going to be the really fun part, we will have a case study with Amira ElSayed. She is going to present some of her work and experience with a case example of Aswan, and we're going to build a climate story with her in real time. And then finally, we're going to end with another group exercise, and I'm going to ask you to take your example or any examples that come to you as we're going through all this, and we're going to try to write some very short and but therefore stories and capture your thoughts on that. So with all of that, let's jump into climate change itself. Now, in August 2021, last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, released its most recent climate science report. And its headline finding, just point A1, said it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. The human influence they are talking about here is the emissions of greenhouse gases. These gases are principally carbon dioxide, but they also include methane, nitrous oxide, and a few other things. These come from human activities such as burning fossil fuels for transportation, for fuel, changes in land use such as deforestation, as well as some smaller contributions such as from livestock. Now, these gases are called greenhouse gases because their structure helps trap heat in the atmosphere. Very simply, solar energy comes in and just more of it stays in than would otherwise. And the outcome of this is the overall temperature of the planet is rising. One of the most fundamental graphs that tracks the development of climate change is this one. It's known as the Keeling curve, and it records the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from an observatory on Mauna Loa, on the mountain of Mauna Loa on the big island of Hawaii. Data that makes up this curve has been gathered since 1958, and the curve has only ever gone up. Putting this 1958 to present in longer context, this is a carbon dioxide curve that has been built from data from ice cores. Now, putting those together with other data have been used to reconstruct both temperatures, and we're pointing to this. These 2 graphs were recently put out by the IPCC as well. And as you can see on the left, if you sort of go back to the carbon dioxide curve, this is the temperature curve. They match relatively well. Again, temperature is going up. And the graph on the right shows the result of modeling studies that show that the warming we are seeing now really is the result of human activity. Now, if we step away from the graphs for a few minutes, what does climate change look like? How are we really feeling it? Now, as I've just described, climate change is an increase in global heat. And this heat manifests in a range of what I'll call observable phenomenon. And as it turns out, we've observed all of these phenomenon in 2021 alone. There's increased heat and heat waves. There is drought. Combinations of heat and drought lead to increased risk of intense wildfires. Combinations of temperature, drought, fires, and so forth are leading to changes in environments, which can lead to expansion of species, decimation of others. And I've just grabbed COVID-19 as one example of this, one of the situations that can lead from that. Now, warmer air can also hold more moisture, which leads to more precipitation, which leads to floods. Warmer temperatures also lead to melting of ice and permafrost. Melting ice and melting permafrost combined with absorbed heat are raising sea levels. And warmer seas combined with warmer temperatures can hold more moistures, and that leads to more intense storms. And the devastation of all of these things together are leading to loss of lives, homes, livelihoods, and the movement of people within and between countries and across borders. And this leads to all of these together lead to 2 fundamental points for connecting cultural heritage with climate change. First is that, along with everything else on the planet, culture and heritage are being and will be affected by the increases in rising temperatures. Forces like heat and drought and flood, these have always affected culture and heritage. It's not that they have never been affected before, but what climate change is doing is it's accelerating, it's intensifying, and it's recombining these forces. Second, from all of the evidence we have, it's clear that human activities that have led to climate change, they didn't start in 1958 with the compilation of the Keeling curve. As I've come to say, climate change itself has a history, and the patterns and practices that have led to all of those traditions and practices that we now hold in transportation and energy use and so forth, those are all held in culture and heritage. And these graphs also show us that there were human societies before all of the conditions that led to the present day experience of climate change, which means that culture and heritage also hold other ways of living in the world and the ways in which societies have both persisted and changed over time. So these 2 points, that culture and heritage are affected by climate change, and they hold information essential to understanding human relationships that have both created and can respond to climate change. These are the essence of climate stories. Science has also made clear that to have a chance to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, by 2030, greenhouse gas emissions need to be reduced by half on a path to net zero by 2050. Being able to talk well about climate change, how we see it taking shape, how we relate to it, is an important part of this challenge. And so what I hope you'll see with climate stories is that they are both simple, but also profound, and they are part of this process. So my goal here is to help you see and work with both of these sides and start to become comfortable and familiar with working through climate stories. So with all of that together, let's get started on those themes. The 4 themes of Every Place Has a Climate Story are changes in the material world, which is about how do we see change happening in material things. There's changes in experience and lifeways, which is about how are Indigenous, traditional, and associated communities experiencing change? How is climate change being lived and felt? There's insights on change from the past. How did past societies respond to past environmental change and past environmental stresses? And 4th, the origins of modern climate change. How has the modern climate change situation come to be? What are the social, cultural, technological, economic, intellectual, and philosophical trends that have combined over time to create the present that has climate change in it? Now, with those all briefly introduced, I'm going to go into each in a little bit more detail. For changes in the material world, one of the first examples that I like to give with this is ice patch archaeology, and that's the photo on the left-hand side of the screen. And this is the process of recovering fragile organic materials that are melting out of long, stable ice patches. This ice wouldn't be melting if the temperatures weren't getting higher, weren't getting warmer, and the materials, or fragile organic materials, they wouldn't survive being frozen and exposed and frozen and exposed. So that the fact that they are being exposed now and they are intact shows us that something is changing. They are melting out now for the first time. But like the park rangers that I introduced this workshop with, not everyone has ice patches to monitor. In fact, most of us probably don't. So how do we identify material changes that are due to climate change? Sometimes it takes a bit of sleuthing. So let me share another example. St. Gaudens National Historical Site is in the state of New Hampshire, which is in the New England northeastern part of the US. It's far up there, fairly north. This park is the home of the sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens. Now, if you have not heard of him, that is fine. His name isn't widely known, but you have probably seen or held his work because he's the sculptor who created the portraits that are on the front side of all US coins. So if you've ever seen or held a US coin, you have held his work. Now, his home was built in the late 19th, early 20th century, and it includes a set of brick walkways that he designed that run throughout the property. In 2013, 2014, the superintendent of this site asked me a question very similar to the park rangers, which is, I don't have glaciers, I don't have polar bears, and I'm not on a coast. Is climate change even a problem in this park? Is it something I need to be worried about at all? Among other things, he happened to be going through his maintenance record. And as we started to talk about climate change, one of the things he noticed was the park had been replacing more bricks in those walkways in previous years than it had well before that. And then looking at some other information, he could see that northern New Hampshire used to just freeze in the winter and it would stay frozen. But now what the records were showing us is the area would freeze and then it would thaw, and it would freeze and it would thaw. And that kind of temperature change can really do a number on material objects like bricks. So with that, he was able to strongly suggest that the breaking and the cracking of bricks is a result of climate change. Some other national park staff are going through similar searches now to try to understand why adobe walls in the American Southwest are collapsing. It's the same question. What are the stresses that we're seeing? Where are those stresses coming from? So figuring out the connections of climate change to material change that we can see and touch, it can be tricky. We also recognize that those bricks at St. Gaudens, they were getting older. But it's that combination of the sleuthing and checking that can create the story. And even the process of sleuthing and saying, is this climate change? That can also be really good material for a story. I'm also going to share with you a reference that may be useful. It's a large 5-page chart that was prepared by my program at the National Park Service. It lists all of the observable phenomenon of climate change, specific impacts across all 5 areas of cultural heritage. This chart was completed in late 2016. We know it's not exhaustive, but hopefully it can give a few ideas, and it's, to the best of my knowledge, still the most complete chart with references that exists. So I was going to, Chewy, I just realized I'm in screen share mode. Do you have that link that you're able to?
It's already in the chat.
You are amazing. Thank you so much. So that link will take you to the document that holds that chart in case it's useful for you. All right, on to changes in experience and lifeways. The example that inspired this theme is shown on the left, and it is Native Hawaiians working with traditional plants. And they were struggling to continue to access these plants because as temperature and precipitation changes have been happening in Hawaii, the growth patterns of these plants was going up the volcano slopes. And there were also some invasive species coming in. So it was harder for them to access these plants that they needed to make traditional things. And as you can see, they're doing some weavings there. To share with you another example, I will also go back to St. Gaudens again. As part of his process of getting to know the park, the superintendent was talking with the local community there, and he learned that there had been a tradition throughout most of the 20th century of holding a Lilac Festival over Memorial Day. Now in the US, that holiday always happens the last weekend in May. But by the time he was superintendent in beginning in 2013, 2014, the lilacs in that area were done blooming at least a week before Memorial Day. So there had definitely, the change in temperature was something that was causing, it's known to cause plants to bloom earlier. So this effect of warming temperature had really changed the local flowering cycles, and it had broken the connection between the community and that celebration that they had held for many decades. So very similar process, again, to finding this sort of theme, similar to the change in the material world. What are the stresses that we're seeing? What's been happening? What are the changes that are going on? All right, insights on change from the past. The example I'm showing you on the left is Chaco Canyon in the American Southwest, which the Anasazi peoples left following a series of droughts that ended around AD 1300. I always tend to think of this theme as being the ace in the hole, because almost any place we go now, at some point in time at least, was a home to people. And while they were there, they went through things. And that's the real key here. What happened here? What environmental variability did they go through? What environmental stresses did they go through? And what can we see and what do we know about how they responded and dealt with those stresses? That's the essence of this theme. And then I want to add one more piece on this. What also goes with this theme are the questions that we ask of the past and why we ask them. And the photo that I'm showing you on the right is a graph from work of an archaeologist in the US called Scott Ingram, who's been working with those droughts of the Anasazi with an eye to trying to prepare for droughts that are happening now in the Southwest and that are projected to continue in a very severe way into the future. What he looked at was across multiple households, across multiple watersheds in the Southwest over several centuries. And he mapped out which places were abandoned first as water supplies changed. And he asked the question, who left first? People who started with more water or people who started with less? And one of the things he found was that the results that came from archaeology are not what we had expected. The human behavior that we had anticipated was not supported by the data. It was actually the people who started with more water first left earlier. So that really challenges our own assumptions about human behavior, what is possible or likely under climate change, and the stories under this theme can really help us see a wider picture of who we are and how we respond. Finally, origins of modern climate change. The photo I'm showing you here on the left, which I realize is quite dark and you probably can't see it, is the original inspiration for the theme. It is Harper's Ferry, which is in the US state of West Virginia, which has been a crossroads for coal transport and iron smelting for over 200 years. One of my former Park Service colleagues, Katie Bliss, just expressed this theme incredibly well. At one point, several years ago, we were on the phone, and at one point she said, you know, I'm sitting here at Harper's Ferry, and I am watching trains of coal go by. These trains of coal have been going by for more than 200 years. What set these trains rolling is what has caused climate change. But they weren't started for the purpose of causing climate change. They were started with the goals of doing so many of the things we still want, to build a community, to build a business, to really support a family. How do we unwind all of the decisions that were made for things that we still value and collectively make new decisions that can respond well to climate change? And so all of those forces, all of the things we want, how we hope for, how we see ourselves, and how those interact with technology and the economy of how so much of the world has been built over the last several centuries, that is the essence of this theme. I'm also adding one more piece here. Over on the right is a historical photo of Lowell, Massachusetts, which was one of the earliest industrial centers in the US producing textiles, and part of it is now a national park. When I first introduced these 4 themes, I really didn't know how they would be accepted by my colleagues. What turned out is that Lowell, Massachusetts park staff were really enthusiastic about this theme. Like St. Gaudens, they don't have glaciers, they don't have polar bears, and they are not on a coast. So talking about climate change in the way the mainline media often talk about it didn't work for them. But the origins of modern climate change was a very strong fit with the purpose and history of their park. But also, by setting this theme as part of a larger project, my sense was it gave them permission to talk about climate change in a way they might not have done themselves. So I wanted to add this sense of where we are able to talk about climate change, where it is safe to do so, and where it is still not, is also part of this theme. So these are our themes. Now let's get on to writing climate stories. Now, climate stories are called stories, obviously, I've been using that term, but they are not fiction. Rather, they are intended to be vehicles for best available sound science, the best information that we have. And what I mean by this is, again, with those park rangers originally in mind, is that once written, your stories can be presented as they are, but you can also pull them apart and use them in sections, however works with a conversation you might be having, because each piece of it is itself very reliable. Therefore, I selected the and, but, therefore, or ABT method of climate storytelling as crafted by science communicator Randy Olson. Let me just briefly tell you a little bit about him. He was originally trained as a marine biologist and became tenured faculty, but he got really frustrated with how most scientists were communicating their work to the public, which is they weren't doing it very well. So he left academia, went to film school in Los Angeles, and spent many years there learning to produce films and write stories. And now he's come back to the science world saying, let me help you express what you do and share what you do in a story and narrative format. I've had the chance to work directly with Randy and be trained by him several times, and I learn more every time I do it. And one of the points he makes over and over again, is that we learn storytelling by doing it over and over again, coming up with a story, sharing it, hearing others, and doing it again and again. So this workshop is the start of our practice. It is not the end point at all. Randy has done and brought together a lot of work. And one piece that I find really fascinating is they've actually done brain scans of people who are listening or watching a narrative and people who are watching disjointed facts or something without a clear arc to it. And what these scans show us is that listening to a narrative literally brings us together at the level of the functioning of our brains. So how do we do it? At its core, a story starts when something happens. It's not necessarily about an individual, but it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the ABT approach, you start by knowing sort of what you want to express, and then you organize the information so that as you're expressing it, something happens like this. And is where the story starts, but creates the tension and therefore provides the resolution. For those of us who are visual, you could think of it like this. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, bringing all the pieces together. And Randy also recommends a 3-part method that he calls word, sentence, paragraph. If you can, start with or develop a single word that describes what you want to talk about. A sentence concisely presents all of your information in an and, but, therefore format. It may be a very long sentence, but it should have all the parts. And then you can write paragraphs that they can be as long as you need them to be to present all of your data, but it still has that same format. Now, the first major effort to write climate stories took place in 2015. I had an intern working with me in Washington, DC, and we worked with 5 volunteer parks. We did the research and did consulting with park staff. And what I want to do with you now is just bring them all together, and I'm going to share with you the sentence stories that we came up with. First one is Catoctin Mountain Park. We used that story theme 1 for material change with the theme of continuity. And the sentence came out to be, the Catoctin cabins were built as the first recreational camp for disabled children in the 1930s and are still in use today as nature retreats. But projections indicate increasing temperatures will lead to structural damage from more intense rainfall. Therefore, the National Park Service is researching ways to preserve historic mortar. We worked with Harper's Ferry National Park, and unlike the example I gave you before, we also used material change here. We used the theme of cycles, and our sentence came out to be, historic armories such as Harper's Ferry used a lot of wood, and such use led to extensive deforestation, which in turn contributed to extensive flooding. The forests are now regrown, but the industry spurred by these early factories is now linked to increased intensities in rainfall. Therefore, the threat of flooding in this area continues. We work with Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument. And for this, we use the 3rd theme, Insights from the Past, with the theme of innovation. And this sentence came out to be, Sunset Crater erupted circa AD 1066 and covered an area periodically affected by drought with ash and made agriculture difficult to impossible for several years. But the local Sinawa population stayed in the area and developed the technique of cinder mulching, which helps to retain soil moisture, therefore providing an example of traditional agriculture that may be useful in the future as the climate becomes hotter and drier. For Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, we also used Insights from the Past with the theme of resilience. And the sentence came out to be, the Hopewell people returned to their lands after several centuries of extended flooding and experienced conflict and competition among themselves for resources. But they also developed a combination of new technology, architecture, agriculture, and new exchange patterns of gifts and alliances. Therefore, the resilience of their culture for the next 500 years can be seen as based on both new ways of doing things and new ways of relating to each other. And finally, for Sino Canal National Historical Park, we used the origins of modern climate change theme and with the theme of choice. And the sentence came out to be, industrial legends, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Harvey Firestone camped together along the C&O Canal in 1921 and noted to each other that if a hydropower dam had been built instead of the canal, it would have produced more energy. But the nature they themselves enjoyed camping in would have been very different. Therefore, their enjoyment of the outdoors benefited from the choices of previous generations. Now, with all of these in mind, I will say that the ABT format is very simple while also being powerful, because it forces you to know what your point is. Often when I hear people say, oh, tell me the story of that, what they mean is just talk about it. Tell me some background, give me the flavor. And that is absolutely valid information, but it is not a narrative. Narrative sets the stage, it brings in the tension, and then it provides a resolution. It follows that very distinctive pattern. So a climate story must be a narrative. When you first see the ABT, it looks like a fill in the blank, and it looks very simple. And yes, you can put almost any words you want into it, but that isn't the point. The ABT, as it was first framed by Randy Olson, and as I've been adopting it here for climate stories, it's about organizing the information so that it comes to a clear and meaningful point. So how do you find that point? The clearest summary guidance I can give you is that it's an iterative search process. You can start working with the themes and use that to spark some different ideas, or you may already have an idea or hear a fact or a situation that you want to build a story around, and then you can work with the themes to help refine it and decide what it is you want to talk about. To make this more real, I want to tell you a little bit more about how we actually came to this story about the C&O Canal. When I first proposed that set of 4 themes to my Park Service colleagues, I did it on a conference call. And afterwards, one of the colleagues at C&O Park, she called me and she said, oh, I have an idea. And that's when she told me that not only did Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Harvey Firestone know each other in the early 20th century, but they liked to camp together along the canal. And immediately we just agreed that this knowledge that these 3 magnates of industry, without whom we probably wouldn't have the current crisis of climate change, that they loved camping in nature. There had to be a story in that. But the thing is, irony itself is not a story. And it turned out to be harder than we thought to really find the story and the narrative in the situation. 2 earlier versions that we came up with that were sort of about serendipity just left all of us saying, well, so what? It's funny, but why? So I told the intern who was working with me, Jacob Mace, I said, go back and see what else you can find. And he dug through the research, and that's when he found the piece of information about their observation about the dam. And the idea of bringing this together around choice really crystallized. And let me tell you, this park is a very long, skinny park. It's about just under 200 miles long, stretching from northwestern Washington, D.C., which is pretty wealthy and liberal, up to the coal country of West Virginia. And one of the park interpreters who worked with us on this project, she said, I have to be able to talk with anyone I meet in this park, regardless of which end they came in from. Stories that are about the irony and serendipity of the situation, those wouldn't resonate with people from both ends. But she said, choice, I can talk about choice, past choices and future choices with anyone, regardless of where they're coming from. So this is where I say, yes, every place has a climate story. Every place actually has multiple climate stories. And the real challenge is figuring out what is the story that you most want to tell, and how will your audience hear it, and what do you want them to understand? And that is a key part of deciding how to shape and frame your story. Now, finally, I want to tell you a little bit more about the buts and the therefores process of writing climate stories, and then we'll get into our exercises. Now, the butt of your story, this is what you really want people to know. This is the idea and the information that you really want to call people's attention to. The information through your and statements sets the context, and the but is that really critical point that contrasts with the context. To illustrate this, let's go back to that first story that I told you at the start of this workshop. The story starts with me as an archaeologist, knowing that there were people who learned to live everywhere. And there was that challenge of the park rangers not knowing how to talk about climate change. But what I really wanted you to know from this is that it was that idea, it was that recognition that every place has heritage. Heritage is a way to save the day. That's what I wanted you to know, and using it as the but really calls your attention to it. And then it leads to that resolution of, well, now we have climate stories. So another example of the power of the but, I want to share with you a video that was made by 3 heritage organizations in the UK. Last fall, they used the climate story themes to create a series of 14 short videos that were shown throughout the COP26 meeting in Glasgow. Their intro to this has the strongest ABT structure, so I quickly want to share it with you now. So let's see if this goes. Can you hear that?
Climate is changing.
Hotter days,
damaging storms,
Hurricane force winds,
heavy downpours,
and frequent flooding already feature regularly in our lives across the world.
And as sea levels rise, coastal communities are the first to feel the impact.
climate change is devastating our coastal ecosystems.
Eroding our coastlines,
destroying connection to our past, to our present.
And flooding our communities.
but heritage and we who care for heritage can help.
Our job is to understand existing sites and artifacts before they are lost forever.
We work with communities to understand coastal heritage and climate change across
England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, and find evidence we need to understand the past environments,
Ecosystems, societies, industries,
And how changes in climate have and continue to affect them.
By understanding the past and sharing its stories now, we can build resilience for the future.
Great. So I think hopefully you can see, in that it was a really strong ABT structure. Climate change is happening and damage is happening to communities, but heritage and we who care for heritage can help. That's the key point they wanted to get across. And therefore, by working with the past, we can be part of effective climate action. So again, in this, yes, heritage is what saved the day. Let's go in just a little bit more to the therefores. Now, therefores are what brings the story all together. It's what it means. And this actually can be one of the hardest parts of the story to write because you have to figure out what that meaning is. But when we manage to do it, it's really powerful because it means you haven't just handed your audience a problem. There's this and this, but you've also pointed them towards a resolution. Now, I've gone through all the stories that I've shared with you so far, and I've put together 3 types of climate story therefores. It looks like they can describe the scope or nature of the problem being faced, sort of a, therefore this is, this happened, this built. And for example, the Sunset Crater, the Harper's Ferry, and even the Climate Stories video all said, this and this happened, but therefore this is the situation that's resulted. Second type of therefore gives some clarity on who we are and the nature of being human in relation to climate change. Therefore we are. And I think both the Hopewell and the C&O Canal story are this kind of therefore. And we can have therefores that point in a direction for action. Therefore, this needs to be done. And the Catoctin story does this in a very low-key way, and the UK Climate Stories video that you've just seen does it in a very powerful, larger way. Now, I know we're all just diving into this at the moment. Once you have started to be comfortable with your information and the ands and the buts and how they all fit together, then you can start to work with them a bit more to be really creative, to pull out deeper points that you want to make. And to show you what this can look like, I'm going to share with you one full-length, called full-length climate story to show you what I mean. And you'll see some different uses of the buts and the therefores as we go. And then we'll get on to our first group exercise. So here we go. The first attempt at the European settlement of Pensacola, Florida, began in 1559 with the objectives of Native American religious conversion and the support and defense of Spanish colonization. Nearly 1,500 people, under the leadership of Tristan de Luna, sailed from Veracruz, Mexico. And a hurricane struck while the new arrivals were unloading their ships, sinking 8 of their 11 vessels. Survivors suffered sickness and starvation until leaving in 1561. This seemed the end of Pensacola. But it wasn't. 140 years later, in 1698, a new settlement was undertaken on royal order following news of French efforts to colonize the Gulf Coast. The settlement was placed on a high bluff near the mouth of the bay, and then suffered fires, constantly rotting timbers, and raids by local Native American tribes. And then it surrendered to the French in 1719. This seemed the end of Pensacola. But it wasn't. The next attempt at settlement began in 1722 on a barrier island in the bay. This island was damaged by a hurricane in 1740, a series of weak hurricanes in 1751, and then another series of hurricanes in 1752, leaving, as the survivor wrote, almost nothing to live on. This seemed the end of Pensacola. But it wasn't. Survivors moved back to the mainland to a less defensive but higher and less flood-prone location that is now historic downtown Pensacola. Therefore, we can say it can take a while to learn a local environment. We could say, therefore, communities change over the course of their history, and now it's just part of a longer story. Therefore, we can see that there are multiple reasons why communities are exposed to hazards that affect their location. And some of these may be larger economic and political forces that override local experience. And therefore, history and how we tell it is an essential part of understanding how and why we are vulnerable to climate change now. All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. And we're going to move on to our first exercise. I'm going to say I didn't leave a specific space for questions and answers. So what we're going to do next is we're going to share a Miro board that has all 4 themes on it. And I'm going to ask that you share any ideas that you have from your work and where might you put it on one of those themes. And if you have specific questions on the presentation, you are welcome to put those in the chat as well, and I will do my best to answer them. But we wanted to jump straight on to having you work a bit with these themes. So we're going to take probably not more than about 10 minutes. We're going to do this fairly quickly, and then we're going to move on to Amira's case study. So first, I think this is where we just ask, from your work and from your experience, are there any ideas that you have for a climate story, and where might these fit on these themes?
Ms. Samantha, I see you're unmuted. Would you like to share your story?
I'd like to know if we should write it down or talk.
You may do either. I think probably raising your hand if you can and saying it. And Jui is wonderful at capturing things while you talk. Or if it's easier for you to type it out in the chat, we can see it there and move it over. So either one, really. But if you're unmuted, would you like to give us your idea?
I was thinking that I have a wonderful aunt that already passed away. She was born in 1913, and by the time that we were born, the youngest generation of the family, she was always complaining about the changes in climate in her hometown. That was a very beautiful hometown with very lot of historical buildings, and she was complaining that it was much warmer nowadays in the 80s. and she was telling us beautiful stories about there was frost in the morning every day when they were living there, and now the climate was much warmer, and they had to change their way of living, because now they had to adapt to agricultural, I mean, all the clothes and all the habits had to change because of the warmer climate. So I was thinking that we could say that the climate change is happening much longer than in the 1950s, that we had that curve, that carbon dioxide curve, and that people really perceive this in their everyday lives. And so if we can relate to people and to the community, they are really going to have to grasp this understanding much deeper than we think. That we don't really need scientific knowledge to make them understand. So I'm finding very enlightening your talk, because we can really understand that people are in their everyday lives affected by the climate change, even if they don't are conscious about it. And we could write a story with a lot of therefore. Therefore, we can perceive that it started much longer than in the mid-century, and we could also understand that people know about it. Even if they don't really know, they have this understanding. We could really have a lot of therefore, I think. That's it by now. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I can see two different ways, maybe to shape that story. It absolutely sounds to me like it's like a theme too. It's that exchange and experience in life ways. And that sort of arc of how you said it was your grandmother. Is that correct?
It was my aunt.
Your aunt.
My aunt.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. And so she was like, yes, I am living something differently. And she was expressing that, which is, there's so many therefores I would love to pull from that, because it's that sense of, it didn't start in 1958 with those graphs and those charts.
Yeah.
It's been changing earlier. But then also some of the things that she was experiencing and seeing, we could also put those under change in the material world, because it was changing things. And so
it was changing.
Yeah, you could put it in both places and build stories. And it comes down to sort of which therefore might you want to most emphasize for a given story.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What a great example. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm seeing Kathy has just shared one. Oh, you've got a full and but therefore. Fantastic. Kathy, would you like to read your ABT and tell us what theme you think it might fit under?
I'm in the office. Can you hear me, Marcy?
Yes. Hear you
Sorry,
fine.
I'm in a corner in the office. So I just heard it on the radio this morning, actually, on the way into work, and I thought, God, that's terrible. I mean, it's sad and it's terrible at the same time. So the Winter Olympics in Beijing, they're manufacturing they're using machines basically to create artificial snow for the Winter Olympics. Big energy input, plus a lot of the sports people were saying, because it's much more compacted, it's faster, and they're more likely to pick up injuries. And the reporter was saying, how sustainable is this in the future? Are we going to have to basically give up the idea of winter sports competitions because of climate change? So I just thought it was actually kind of, and I kind of basically stole it from the radio. It's not my own climate story.
You can take inspiration wherever it comes up.
So I guess it's I don't know, changes in life ways or changes in the material world. I don't know. Where do you think it goes?
Yeah, I think it's also that it's definitely there's change in the material world, because if we wanted to emphasize the change in snow, like the decreasing availability of snow in places that have hosted the Winter Olympics. So I think I might put it there first. It could potentially go under experiences and lifeways, but I'm also wondering, there might be a way to frame it and shape it so that it would go under theme 4, under origins of modern.
Yeah, I
climate
mean, what
change.
I was thinking is it's, you know, it's our resistance to changing our experiences and lifeways, which is actually contributing to the problem, because it's like, rather than just saying, you know, maybe we have to reduce the Olympics or we can't hold them, or we hold them somewhere else where there's, you know, we're forging ahead by sort of using a lot of energy to, you know, to counter the problem, but actually effectively adding to the problem.
Right, in that sense of that, we've had there's an environmental stress, which is essentially the lack of snow, and we respond thinking the technological fix, we will just make snow. We will just use the energy in the water to create the snow to try and keep it the same. And that approach to a solution has its own circular in it.
Yeah,
So,
it's not, it's not, you're not really adapting to the reality.
Right. Yeah. So in a sense, it's almost like that approach to a solution is causing some of additional problems, as you were saying. Oh, that's a great example. Are there other ideas that folks would like to have?
I see Mr. Abiodun. He has raised his hand, Marcy. Maybe we can give him a chance.
Yes, great.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Abiodun from Nigeria.
Afternoon. We hear you, Mr.
You're
Abiodun.
very faint.
Yeah, I want to give my own, let me just say my insights. Because on that, the particular insight on change from the past. So I'll talk about the Yoruba people. So a recent study that came out by an archaeologist.
I'm so sorry. I'm not capturing any of that. I am so sorry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, your microphone is
close.
going in and out a little bit. It sounded like you're talking about insights on change from the past.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I hadn't quite captured what about it.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Yoruba culture and how it has developed for the Yoruba people, how they have developed, consider the effects of climate change in the past. So we had Yoruba people that they've existed for centuries ago, and around 600 AD and 700 AD, there was this big dry in West Africa. It's a kind of a climate change event that occurred around that period of time. So it led to the disruptions of people within West Africa. We know the history of the Bantusan people that left and scattered all through Africa as at then. But within this, the people of the Yoruba, people that we now know as Yoruba, emanated from a particular area within the Niger Belt region. In Niger, they call Niger River Belt region. So as a result of that big dry, and they spread to other parts to the southern parts where we now have them in Nigeria. So at that point in time, there was an establishment of an empire. We called it the Ife Empire. Although this is not really this is not in history literature. It is a recent study that was discovered by a professor of archaeology, known as Professor Ogundiro. So he lectures at a university in the US. So he came about the fact that this empire existed between 1400 and 1570. So that empire actually, it's now the Ife. It's now a particular area in Nigeria, in southwestern Nigeria, and it is known to have been the cradle of Yoruba civilization, Yoruba people civilization. So he argued that it was actually an empire because for the fact that for those about centuries ago, we still have the culture, the Yoruba culture that emanated from that Ife still exists till today, definitely. And he used some findings to back his argument up. For instance, he talked about the glass making industry that was very unique to the Ife people, and they still find that glass making sites in Ife after during the dug up. So it's a kind of when due to the second climatic effect now, that was the Little Ice Age. That was around 1400 and 1570. So that's disrupted that particular empire and scattered the people within that empire, scattered across southern Nigeria or southwestern Nigeria. So it is that people that became Yoruba, and one of those like the peoples of within that Yoruba is the Oyo people. It is the Oyo people that now domesticated a language for like through their own because the Oyo also became an empire around 1650 to 19th century, like from 17th to 19th century before it collapsed. So it's like through climate change, there's a kind of a development of the Yoruba culture or the peoples and traditions, and even the spread of Yoruba people through the southwestern parts of Nigeria. So I didn't actually follow the and buts and the therefore, but I hope you're able to get. So it's in essence, climatic factors actually restructure people's culture. It redistributes the people within a geographical space, and at least it's also expand them beyond. Like it's not just the negative effect of food. They might have had some negative effect then, but at least the positive effect of it is that we still had the Yoruba people that had spread beyond what was known as Ife to becoming a southwestern dominating southwestern part of Nigeria. And we have them in diaspora anyway. We have these people in Brazil, not as a result of climate change anyway, but as a result of the Atlantic slave trade.
Yeah, you've just crunched in so much, and no worries that it is not in the end, but therefore we're not, that'll be the exercise at the end. And we might actually loop back to you there, because when I'm hearing there's been those climatic changes and both the expansion of the empire and then also sort of its duration and what the empire was sort of built on. So there's a lot of material there. And I think actually that is a wonderful point. I'm going to turn to Amira now, but I would love to come back to you.
Okay.
Because Amira and I started with a similar, like, here's a lot of pieces. And then we sort of like, okay, what's the tension? What is the but that we want to communicate? And then we'll talk through what's the therefore. So that was great. And we may loop back to you and start to pull it into that form. So yeah, that was a wonderful segue. Amira, can I turn it over to you for an introduction of the Aswan case example?
Yes, of course, yes. I will share it. I will share the document. The story, or if I can say, it is a very, in a very few words, it is, Aswan is a place, one of the very oldest city in south of Egypt. And it is the first governorate from the south. It is situated on the border between Egypt and Sudan. And this place has been a settlement for the first community, Egyptian community, coming from the ancient Egyptian era, since 4,000 years before BC. And it was a place where if I can say, it was like the center of the beginning of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Even the first kingdom or the first king who unified the whole Egypt to become the ancient Egyptian civilization was Narmer. He was coming from a place near Aswan. Aswan was very known by his very dry temperatures, and even she is like the place where you can find all the strong and all the stones, like the granite stones, and this is why it was always the place where we can find all the kind of stones that we can build the temples and so on. It has its unique landscape, and it has also its unique architecture. And what happened, if we can go by time a little bit, this is here, if you can see, it is located, of course, on the Nile River. It has been the flood of the Nile River before we have any kind of dam, or before we built dams. So it was used to have flood every year. The flood come in Egypt at the month of August, and it covered the whole land with of course it is coming, the water is coming of the flood full of sediment and full of silt, which was very good for the fertilization. And you know that the ancient Egyptian civilization was an agricultural civilization. Then due to the environment in this place, a lot of crafts has been developed depending on the kind of palms and the kind of agriculture that it was there, and depending on this kind of plants, a lot of crafts had been, if I can say, innovate, and has been growing up from century to century. Basketry, jewelry, pottery, and even I have bring here some old photos coming from the early 19th, where we can see Aswan before we built the first dam, because we have two dams in Aswan, not only the high dam, but and you can see here even how the flood was coming and going, and even he covered the whole temples at all. With a very high level. Then in the 1899, the first low dam, we say the Aswan low dam was built, first of all to produce the electricity, and of course to reduce the damage which was caused by the flood. And then we built another high dam, which in 1960, which is very well-known one, but to produce, of course, more electricity, because we need more development. But of course, it has we have other side effects related to the erosion and the soil salinity, and of course the loss of sediments, which has been a little bit a part of the other, if I can say, the other side of the building of the high dam. Behind the high dam, we have a very large artificial lake, which has been created to reserve a large amount of water there. And of course, in this lake, we have a different kind of, a new kind of environmental, if I can say, fishes and even the alligators and other animals, and even new plants. We have like a new environmental place behind the dam. So if I can say, behind the dam, we have an environmental case which is completely different from in front of the dam. What happened lately is that with the climate change, or if I can say, Aswan was like I have said for you, it was a very dry place and very warm place in winter, which all people can go just seeking for a very good weather. Even it was like the place where Agatha Christie was even one of the well-known British writers, and even François Mitterrand, the French president, from all over the world, and even since the Roman emperors, they came in Aswan for seeking for a very good place for the where the weather is very warm, and in the same time with a clear and a very hygienic place to be there, because we have a lot of protectorate too. We 3 or 4 protectorate in Aswan. Now, what happened is since 1979 until now, we have a very changing in the temperatures, which we have in 1979, and a very torrential storms, and we have a kind of where a lot of houses has been completely collapsed, and with a lot of even, if I can say, life have been lost. And in this, if I can say, in this year or last year on November 2021, now it is snowing in winter, and we have like heavy rains, and we have flash floods which is gathered all over around the valley, because around Aswan we have like 25 valleys. The water, the flash floods are raising in these valleys, and then they came like a very huge floods coming with all the different villages there, and also we have like what is happening. Also, we have like scorpions which have been devastating. And if I can say, it was like even the Ministry of Health and the army has to interfere, because it has been attacking the areas and the villages. Like you see, a lot of houses has been collapses, and scorpions has been invading and injuring a lot of peoples. From what was learned from the ancient time, from the ancient Egyptian period, what I can say is that the ancient Egyptian tomb, we have like shafts, special shafts has been. We have said that we have a special shaft which has been done in the tombs, especially for the flash flood, and for making the gathering the water there, and make like a path for the water till the Nile, without making any kind of, if I can say, damage for those old tombs. Which means that in the ancient times, also that the temperatures and the environment was same as we are now, a little bit, say, if I can say, because we don't have the whole data till now. But what we can say, that we have a flash flood, and the ancient Egyptians know how to deal with this flash flood without making a lot of damage to their buildings. This is the whole story of Aswan. I hope it was clear.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Amira. When Amira first sent me her document, you can just, and I hope it came through to all of you, like, she's got everything. There's the deep history, there's past water use, there's the change in flooding, there's the 2 different dams, there's the tourism, long history of tourism, the beautiful climate, but the new stresses. It's all of these pieces together. So it's not the question of, again, like, what's your climate story? It's, you've got all of these stories, and it's sort of, how do we start to pull them out and put them together? So what I'm going to do quickly is share my screen again. And what I started to do is, just because I know we don't, I mean, there are so many stories we could write with all of the information that Amira shared with us. At the top of the document that she showed you, she had this paragraph. And I was like, let's just start to work with this paragraph just as an example, just to get us started going. So I'm just sharing this example with you. And my first read through on this was saying, okay, we've got several sentences that she's put in that describe the situation. And I was like, right, remember that commandment that I gave you is the but is that thing that you really want the audience to know. That's what you really want your audience to get to. So I said, let's start with that. She'll say, I asked her what theme. And I think, Amira, if I'm remembering, you were thinking this was under theme 1, sort of material change. So we're going to keep that, under there. Actually, I forgot to put that on my slide. Let's think material change. With that in mind, I was like, all right, so what's the but? What's the thing that really comes out? And what struck me on reading through this is you've got all of these situations, and what's a but for the material change? And her statement that they're facing for the first time frost, snow, heavy rains, and scorpions. This is, a weather test that they haven't had before. That felt like a really strong but. That's a really strong contrast to some of the other things she said. And then her statement that the ancient Egyptian tombs had special shafts for water that reflect how climate is changing. I'm like, that's another possibility. That could be another but statement there. So I checked with her and said, would these be the buts? And I think she has said yes. And I should tell you all, like, this is not a scripted exercise. We are literally working this out in real time. But those were the two that I pulled out. And then since Amira agreed to, like, yes, these could be buts, what I've done, I asked her for some possible those one-word themes. So I've put those at the top. So let's keep those in mind as we go. New age, transforming. This is sort of prepare, be ready, adapt. Like, let's keep those thoughts in mind and then see how we can work together to pull out a full sentence. So the first step I did in this is I was like, all right, what are our ands? What are those things that set the stage, that really make our context? And I took all of her sentences and I just put them as separate bullet points under the ands. And you'll see that blue one, I think that could, and then I also put our potential but statements. And I think that sentence about the ancient tombs with their water, that could be an and, or it could be a but. So that's why I put it in both places. But I just wanted you to see this approach to sort of, she wrote that very nice paragraph with all of that information in it, but to make an and, but therefore story, sort of just pull them apart for a bit to be like, okay, what are the different pieces that we've got to help us? Because sometimes it's easier to rearrange things when you pull them apart. So I think these are the ands and the buts that occurred to me. And I'm going to look at Amira's box on the screen. And I'm going to say, do these feel like the ands and the buts to you? Yeah.
For the end of the but for you, it's so now it is very clear for me. We have like the 5 ends. Aswan, one of the most ancient community and cities in Egypt, coming back from 4000 BC, and then the community and what the community is depending on the tourism. And it was a remarkable warm winter. This is another end because of the weather. And of course, it has a very beautiful landscape with the architecture values and the traditional knowledge. And the last end with related to the ancient Egyptian tomb and the way they used to making like a drainage system for the flash flood. But what we are now facing is the frost and the snow with the heavy raining.
Yeah.
And I think this is a real but what we have in purple. It is looking like more but here than more than the ancient tomb system. I think the ancient tomb system is like it is a little bit like therefore. Perhaps it can go for a therefore more than a but.
Or it could be the but for a different theme, like in Insights on Change from the Past. It might be, we might want to pull together some other ands or go back into your full document and say, okay, what might be some ands that would make that the but? I'm very aware of time. Oh, I was just going to remind us of what the therefores are. So that was just there for a reference. Okay, so what I started to do with this slide is like, okay, let's just think that really simple, this and this, but this, therefore this. So this isn't the most beautiful slide, actually. Let me see. It's just grabbing a highlighter. So it's just sort of, there should probably be like a line or something, you know, across here or like going through. So it's like, what if we did like one of these, this and this, but this, and then we'll come up with a therefore. Actually, probably the pointer is the better thing. Erase pen. So what I was thinking, Amira, what you and I could do is sort of be like, all right, let's take a few of these and be like this and this, but this, and what might be a therefore. And I have a few ideas, but I wanted to talk with you first to see what you think. And with these ideas in mind, are there any short therefores that you can think of that, you know, I'll just say, for example, this and this, but this?
Any therefore from this and this, from
like what might be a therefore that we would put at the end of this sentence? Very long sentence.
Therefore, here I think it is like a result. Therefore, yes, it is like a result. So we can say that like because of that, therefore we have to put like a kind of a new plan for a plan of a preparedness plan for what we can face, for example, to be ready for that. It can be, can be therefore.
Yep. Would you say that again? You can see the two. I realized I can't type when it's in slide mode. I am not nearly as good as you. Would you say that again?
What I am saying that the therefore can be, therefore we have to begin fast as we can to prepare to prepare the community for how they can face this kind of weather, if I can say.
No, that is absolutely great. Let me make that a little bit. Yeah, this is not a mirror board, but there we go. Yeah, that is a very good and but therefore. It's an ancient community. It has this beautiful landscape, but we're facing for the first time frost, snow, heavy rain, scorpions, something we haven't seen before. Therefore, we need to prepare the community for these stresses.
Yes, because also one of the major problems that they face, that these places are very very hard to be reached. This is why they even the government here like bring the army there, because nobody can go through the ways. The routes are very hard between mountains and to reach this community. So this is why we have a lot to do. For example, we have to manage the passes to them, how we can create even some of the most expressive things that before that they used to build their house with a kind of mud and with a buildings which was with a traditional buildings. But when they are used now to build with the cement and with the concrete, it turned to be very bad in this situation, because when they screw, it fell down, it is more, that caused more damage for them, for lives, and for even their if I can say, with the kind of mountain which is coming through where the water is coming with the blocks of cement and the blocks of concrete. Was not easy when, like it was more easier with the traditional way of building that they used to do before.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much there to pull together, and I can feel like it's a bunch of different stories to pull together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to actually stop for a moment and just ask, I'm very, very aware of time, and I don't want to keep you all far past, but I wanted to ask, are there questions or insights that folks have for Amira or about this story or about this approach of pulling these pieces together?
I see a comment from Ms. Marva Karim. She's added a therefore element, that therefore the construction of dam reflect on the Nubian community in Aswan.
Yeah.
Yep. Great. Yeah, there are a number of therefores that we can put on there. Are there other suggestions? I will also add, I did another approach, just so we can see it, of saying, okay, what happens if we could put this together with this, and perhaps, therefore, sort of asking a question, are there older tools that can help bringing that over? Or we could put the bottom two together with the rainwater, and then something like unique features are hidden from view. So there are a number of different ways to take these great, very rich sentences and put them together for the input, therefore approach. So I'll ask, are there, I'll just ask one more thoughts on that, and then we'll jump to our final exercise and just take a few moments to go back to some other ABTs. Are there any other questions for Amira? All right. Well, Amira, thank you so much for being my guinea pig and sharing this wonderful information. It was incredibly useful for me. I hope it was interesting for you, and that folks can see how you start to pull these parts together.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, not hearing any. With the gentleman who shared the theme 3 with us, would you please remind me of your name?
Yeah,
are you still here?
I'm here.
Wonderful. Could we talk with you a little bit more? And Sissy, I'd love to talk with you a bit more and see if we can pull out the but. What is the thing that you would most like folks to know from your story? Is there something that strikes you of, this is what I would most like the audience to take with them?
Yeah. I would like them to know, like, climate change over time cause a transformation for transformations of Yoruba culture and tradition, and even the people as a whole. So the climate change caused the kind of cultural, traditional, and what are the transformation among the Yoruba people.
Right. Did we just capture that right? That is a really profound point.
Right. The first half, yes, that climate change has once caused a transformation of the urban culture, but it has also caused a transformation of the overall cultural and environmental aspect of the country. Is that right? I did miss the last part that I couldn't hear very clearly.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's caused overall transformations of the entire Yoruba people or Yoruba culture, without those people themselves. Like, what I'm saying in the sense, like, the people, some set of people actually oppose the Yoruba culture, which are the Ife people. But at some point, climate change occurred and they had to disperse and spread out to other parts of southwestern Nigeria. In the course of spreading, it expanded their culture beyond just a geopolitical units to mean almost a part, like a part of the country. So Yoruba is not Yoruba. They are people, not a kind of a geographical location. It's the people themselves. So like the people that expanded as a result of a climatic factor that led to little high stage droughts. So it's like people living a particular location just to find ends meet as a result of the effects of climate change, the droughts that occurred between that period of time. So then that culture now became, because that culture now became more or less an urban culture. What we now have today as I can call it a Yoruba race or a Yoruba tribe, something like that. So, and it's it's one of the major ethnic groups in Nigeria. So from being a people of possibly a particular geographical location to becoming a larger people that are spread across parts of a country, like something like that.
So thank you for sharing all that. We're just trying to capture those different points and pull them out. So it sounds, if I'm understanding and just sort of taking it in well, and Julie is typing, that the climatic changes in the past, understanding, yes, from insights in the past, it was those climatic changes or in response to, or I'm thinking out loud, as those changes were happening, the Yoruba culture expanded to other parts of Nigeria. So sort of their expansion happened alongside the climatic change.
Yeah, the various expansion actually happened. They are like two climatic history, or how like it's like historical timeline. So there is the first that's almost the whole of West Africa experienced, and the peoples of West Africa began to migrate from different parts of the world. So then the second one was after the Ife people had been established. So that was between 1400 and 1570. Other empires and states, centralized states, were also affected by that climate change effects of the little ice age drought. So, and that led to the demise of the empire itself. Now, from that empire, the people within that empire spread beyond the areas that accommodated the empire to what is now known as southwestern Nigeria. And those people are now known as Yoruba people, having the same culture, the same knowledge system, the same tradition. They share almost the same thing. The only issue they have is dialect. They have a kind of a distinct dialect, but they are all called Yoruba, and they trace their origin to Ife. So all the states, we have like the 6 states in the southwestern part of Nigeria, and they are all Yoruba people. So presently, as we have it, they might speak different dialects, but they still link back to Ife as their source, their cradle of civilization, where they came from. The people of Osun, people of even up to Lagos, they all still have a connection with that Ife. But that Ife is no longer what it is before. It is now so different. It's more like it caused a kind of historical changes among the Yoruba people. It's actually for the better side of it and not for the other side. Like, climate change to cause disaster and things like that. Of course, it might be disastrous then, but the end now is like it has expanded the Yoruba people, and it has also made their culture more renowned in Nigerian history as we have it today.
Yeah, so much there. I think Julie was, as she always does, has read my mind. I am seeing there's a long post-it note on the middle of the second tier that, as you were saying that, talking about the fragmentation fragmentation and like how long folks had lived there, to me, that sounds like something we might put in the "and" part of your story, because that's sort of saying, this is a condition, or this is something that we have observed, and sort of this is the starting point. And then the "but" part is what's the contrast to that. And I'm almost wondering if the piece that is under "therefore" right now, talking about the effects of climate change, if that might also be part of our "and," in sense of, you have this deep history and there's disaster now, but what we understand is that it was those changes in climate that allowed the expansion of that empire, that allowed them, or that was part of their expansion, if I'm understanding correctly. And then our challenge is to figure out what the "therefore" is. Does that capture it all? Have I heard you correctly? Because I may not have, but that's sort of what I was hearing about how we might arrange those parts.
I think based on what he has written, it actually follows, like it's correlated to what I am trying to explain.
Okay. I'm so sorry, I'm so aware of the time and I don't want to rush you, but I know we'll need to wrap up fairly soon. But I wanted to ask, of the points that we've captured, can you see a way to reorganize them? Is there a way that we can put them together so that what I want to do is really highlight that "but" statement that you had. What is the context that you want to set? And then the "but" will stand in contrast to that.
Okay, what I mean is like, okay, of course, it might, climate change might be disastrous.
Yeah.
And must have caused this thing, but to the Yoruba culture, like over time, it became more like a blessing than a curse. Like, okay, now it has expanded the Yoruba culture and people to all through the southwestern part of Nigeria. So it's like a but. That's a major thing I want I want to, like, people, my audience, to know. I get it. Then I can now say therefore it's, I don't know how to put the "therefore," but at least I know that the bots. I think that I've communicated the bots, like, to some extent.
Yeah, this is where we say the "therefore" is the hardest part, because it does come from, okay, here's the starting context and there's a "but." But then where does that point us? Do we want to, think through, do we want to, are we explaining something that exists now? Okay. Are we pointing in a direction for action? Or have we learned something about what it means to be human? Just to bring those points back together.
Exactly. Let me just come in this. You just give me some hints, and I think now there is the issue of climate change again, which actually affected not the Yoruba people in particular, the droughts of 1960 to 1980s. It affected the northern fringes of Nigeria, especially the Fulani people. These are nomadic people that they engage in transhumance. They used to migrate during the dry season to seek for pastures. So they migrated south, usually migrated southwards. So, but during 1960s, between 1960 and 1980, it affected them to the extent that they migrated in large populations. So the large population of them came down to southwestern Nigeria and had clash with the agriculturalists because as they look for pastures, they destroy farmers' plantations. So it led to Heda's farmers' crisis. And at some point, many of them also became unemployed. They didn't have heads again to live on. So they tilted to engaging in kidnapping, banditry within southwestern Nigeria. It's something that it's happening, is a national security issue. And some people even rose up to say, okay, they called for secession, that the Yoruba must secede. Why? Because the Fulani, the president of the country is from that ethnic division. So they believe that he's siding the Fulani and the likes, and the Yoruba people called for a Yoruba nation. It's just like going back to like having themselves back, like to save themselves from this catastrophe, which was caused, or which is a cascading effect of climate change. Something like that. So can you find a therefore in that? Like,
that's just added a whole new dimension to it, which is fascinating in the sense that you've got the impacts of, you're sort of bringing together the impacts of climate change. But then they are overlying on a complex cultural landscape, if you will, where people have moved around in response to climate change. And yeah, so I think you've just hit on sort of the two ands there, in that sense of climate change is affecting now, and the president is from this ethnic region. It is like there's that present day piece to it. And the but is this tension has a really deep history to it. This goes way back. So I'm paraphrasing your points there, but I think that's, climate change is causing issues, and there are different communities, the different ethnic tensions. But this goes way back. This has a deep history to it. And sort of our therefore is, the moment it's going to be something, it's going to sound much more simplistic than it is, but it's sort of like, those are the roots of some of the challenges that the area is facing now. These challenges didn't just start with climate change, but climate change is making them harder to overcome, is making it all very complex. I feel like I'm talking out loud, but I think I'm seeing those pieces there. I think you've got the three elements, and it's now just working through them to figure out, to make them all connect. But I will ask, does that feel like it's capturing to you the two starting pieces?
Yeah.
Effects of climate change, ethnic, there's a really deep history to it. And then sort of therefore that's why this is such a challenge. It isn't something that can be easily overcome. It comes with a history to it.
Exactly. I think this is better. The therefore actually, like it's actually a current challenges. It has happened before, and it is happening now, and the challenges that the country and the people themselves have to at least have a resolution. It's more or less like they should sit to the round table and find solutions to it.
Yeah. I think what you've just shared with us is I think one of those really profound contributions that heritage has to make is so many of the challenges that we're facing with addressing climate change is they have those deep roots. It's very hard to say, oh, well, if we're just logical about it, or if we like, no, this has a really deep history to it. And that's why sometimes addressing climate change can be really hard, to put it incredibly simply.
Yeah.
Okay.
Someone
Sorry, go ahead.
Someone just shared something on the group chat. Like,
oh, yeah.
I think I love that.
Yes. That is also
the Yoruba culture is proven to be very resilient. Yeah. So despite the effects, it can be a therefore. It's like the Yoruba culture wants to like retain and at least retain their culture and try to secure it from any intrusions and the effects that it caused them.
Yeah. No, that's a very good therefore. Thank you, Samantha. I'm going to ask, Mr. Tlaib, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And really, you've just worked through the process in real time, which is absolutely fantastic. We've now gone about 20 minutes past when we would normally have been scheduled to end. So I just want to ask, are there other sort of one final call? Are there questions or an idea that this has sparked for anyone? And if not, I do understand from Jui, what we will do is we will share my whole PowerPoint presentation and a copy of the Miro board with everyone who is signed up for this workshop. So you'll have that to refer to, go back and sort of, hopefully use it as a guide for working through your own stories. And Amira and Mr. Tlaib, thank you so much for sharing your stories. You made this very alive, and I'm so appreciative. And thank you all for joining this and just diving into climate stories with me. My therefore, like, I would love to go on. This has been wonderful, but we're out of time. Therefore, we must end and go on to our next days. So thank you so much.